It was Christmas Eve, the streets glittered with lights, and the air carried the scent of cinnamon and pine. Families hurried home with gifts in their arms and joy in their laughter, but not everyone had a warm home waiting for them. On one quiet street, covered with snow, a young woman in tattered clothes leaned over a green trash bin, searching desperately for something to eat. Her hands trembled, partly from hunger and partly from the cold. Clutched tightly against her chest was a worn-out book, the only possession she seemed unwilling to let go of. Just a few steps away stood a man, tall and stern in his black coat, his daughter's tiny hand wrapped around his. He was a millionaire, a man used to boardrooms and success, yet that night he stood frozen, watching the heartbreaking sight unfold before him. His daughter tugged on his hand and whispered, "Daddy, she looks so hungry." Her innocent words pierced his heart deeper than any business loss ever could. For years, he had believed Christmas was about gifts, appearances, and luxury, but in that one moment, staring at the fragile woman digging through trash, something stirred inside him. He approached slowly, the crunch of snow beneath his shoes catching her attention. Startled, she turned, her eyes filled with shame and fear, as though expecting him to scold her for being near the neighborhood. Instead, he spoke gently, "You shouldn't be out here like this tonight." Her voice shook as she answered, "I don't want to be, but hunger doesn't care what night it is." She clutched her book tighter, as though it was her last piece of dignity. He noticed the patches on her coat, the thinness of her dress, and the way she tried to stand tall despite the cold breaking her spirit. Something in her words struck him like lightning. Hunger doesn't care what night it is. It wasn't just about food. It was about survival, about the raw truth that while the world celebrated, someone like her fought to see another day. His daughter, still holding his hand, stepped closer. "Daddy, can we help her, please?" The man's throat tightened. He had always been a provider, but only within the walls of his own home. Now he was being asked by his own child to extend that love beyond blood. He offered his hand to the woman, his voice softer than she expected. "Come with us. You don't need to spend tonight like this." She hesitated, glancing back at the bin, then at his little girl's hopeful face. Slowly, she took his hand, and in that fragile grip, he felt more strength than he'd ever known. Back at his home, warmth and light embraced her. The little girl rushed to bring her a blanket, while the father ordered food to the table. For the first time in months, she tasted a meal not pulled from scraps but served with kindness. Tears welled in her eyes, not from the food alone, but from the realization that someone still saw her as human. Later, as the fire crackled and snow fell outside, she finally shared her story. She had once been a teacher, passionate about words and books, but life had taken cruel turns, illness in her family, bills piling up, and eventually the loss of her home. She held onto the book in her arms because it reminded her of who she used to be and who she still hoped to become. Listening to her, the millionaire felt a shift in his soul. He had spent years building wealth, yet in that one night, this woman reminded him of something far more valuable: compassion, humanity, and the courage to keep going even when the world falls apart. His daughter fell asleep by the fire, her small hand still resting near the woman's. He realized then that this Christmas was unlike any other. It wasn't about the expensive gifts wrapped under the tree. It was about the gift of seeing, truly seeing, another soul in need. The woman looked at him with quiet gratitude and said words that would never leave him. "Kindness is the only thing that can't be taken away. You gave me that tonight, and I'll never forget it." Those words changed him forever. He decided from that night on, his wealth wouldn't just serve his business empire. It would serve people like her. He started programs for the homeless, shelters, and education opportunities, because her story reminded him that behind every struggle is a person with dreams and dignity. And every Christmas after that, his home wasn't just filled with decorations and gifts, but with people who needed hope. That single encounter, a homeless woman at a trash bin on Christmas Eve, became the turning point of his life. Because sometimes the greatest riches are not found in money, but in the courage to care. Disclaimer: this is a work of fiction created for inspirational and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental. Christmas Eve carried a strange silence that year, the kind of silence that makes a man listen to his own heart more than the carols or the bells ringing in the distance. And as he walked with his daughter through the snow-covered street lined with glowing wreaths and twinkling lights, he thought of nothing more than getting her home safe and warm until his eyes fell upon a scene that pierced him more deeply than any cold ever could. For there by the green trash bin was a young woman in a torn coat, with patches, her fingers raw from the frost as she rummaged through garbage bags in search of something, anything, that could keep her alive for another day. And though she looked broken, though her dress was frayed, and her face carried the weariness of battles fought too long alone, there was in her eyes a kind of fire that startled him, a dignity she refused to surrender even to hunger, and he could not look away, nor could his daughter, whose small voice trembled as she whispered, "Daddy, she's hungry." And in those words lay a truth he could not ignore, for while he had built empires, while he had measured worth in numbers and contracts, here was a human being reminding him with her very existence that survival is not about profit or loss, but about mercy, about the willingness to see another soul. And as he stepped closer, the crunch of snow announcing his presence, the woman turned, clutching her book to her chest, as though it were her last possession of value, her voice shaking as she said, "I don't want to be here, but hunger doesn't care what night it is." And those words echoed in him like a sermon, for it was Christmas Eve, the night the world spoke of miracles and light, yet here she was, forgotten, unseen, discarded like the trash she searched through, and he realized with sudden clarity that the miracle was not in lights or gifts, but in this very choice before him, whether to pass by or to stop, whether to guard his comfort or open his hand. And when his daughter tugged at him again, pleading softly, "Can we help her, Daddy?" he felt the weight of all his years press against him, for in that child's eyes he saw the purity of compassion that he had long buried beneath responsibility, and so he reached out his hand, saying gently, "Come with us. You don't have to spend tonight like this." And though she hesitated, though shame battled with hope in her eyes, she finally allowed herself to trust that hand, and in her fragile grip he felt a strength greater than any deal he had ever signed. A strength born not of wealth but of survival, of spirit, of resilience. And as they walked together to his home, snow falling softly like a blessing, he realized this night would never be forgotten. For once inside, warmth replaced the cold, the fire flickered with life, and the table was filled not only with food but with the silence of gratitude, the kind that brings tears to a starving soul. And she ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid it would vanish, while his daughter wrapped her in a blanket and smiled as though she had found the true meaning of Christmas herself. And when the woman's tears finally came, they were not only from relief, but from the shocking realization that someone had seen her, someone had remembered her humanity. And later, by the fire, she told her story, that she had once been a teacher who loved words and books, that the book she clutched was her anchor to the person she used to be. But sickness, debt, and cruel circumstances had stripped her of everything except the will to live, and as he listened, something broke open inside him, something years of success had never reached. For in her story he heard not just her voice, but the voices of thousands like her, unheard, unseen, surviving night after night. And he knew then that his wealth had been wasted if it did not touch lives like hers. And so he made a vow in his heart that Christmas Eve, that he would build more than companies. He would build shelters, opportunities, hope itself, because the words she spoke, "Kindness is the only thing that can't be taken away," became the cornerstone of his life from that moment on. And as he tucked his daughter into bed that night, her little hand resting peacefully in his, he understood that this encounter was no accident, that sometimes the richest man in the room is still the poorest in spirit until someone broken shows him what true treasure means. And as he glanced back at the woman who had come in from the cold, her eyes closed in rest for the first time in a long time, he knew he would never again celebrate Christmas the same way, because Christmas was not about gifts or lights, but about the courage to open your door, the humility to listen, and the willingness to be changed forever by the simple truth that to see another soul and to answer their need is the greatest miracle of all. And from that night onward, His life was not defined by what he had built for himself, but by what he gave away, because a homeless woman at a trash bin on Christmas Eve taught him that true wealth is not measured in gold or numbers, but in compassion that endures, and that lesson became the legacy he passed on to his daughter, who would grow up knowing that the greatest power her father ever had was not the millions he earned, but the kindness he chose.